I've played a lot of games. I've played good ones and I've played bad ones. Some I've forgotten the moment the credits rolled, while others have stuck with me for a little while before fading into the background. But there's one game that always stays in the forefront of my mind, no matter how much time passes. One that the second I think about it, I'm immediately filled with warmth and nostalgia, and also a sadness that I can't experience it for the first time again. A game that I would consider one of my favourites of all time. Now don't get it twisted, this wasn't love at first sight. I started Persona 4 immediately after coming off Persona 3 Reload, and initially it felt like a step backward. The visuals were simpler, the UI wasn't as refined, and the dungeons lacked the flashy style of P3R. But as I spent more time in Inaba, something changed. The game slowly won me over, not through spectacle, but through heart. Inaba is one of the most immersive settings in gaming because it feels so real. Unlike the vast sprawling cities of the other two big titles, Inaba is small and quiet, which when you first get into, especially off the back of the Tatsumi Port Island from Persona 3, feels like a little bit of a letdown, but by the end of the game, you realise those qualities are what make it feel so special. The shops in Central District, your house, the school, every location in this game feels personal, as you would expect a small town's locations to feel in real life. The game's warm colour palette, relaxing soundtrack and cosy environments create an atmosphere that's impossible to forget. It's the kind of setting that when you finish the game, you end up becoming nostalgic for it, a place you've never even been to, and that to me is why it's one of the best maps for sure in a JRPG, but also one of the most immersive settings in gaming. One of my biggest issues with Persona 3 was how its story and characters didn't always feel like they belonged together. The game tells this incredibly heavy, mature story about death and its inevitability. It presents itself as a somber, reflective experience, but the characters don't always fit that tone. Why the fuck are they laughing? The dude just died. What the fuck? I feel like when you're dealing with a story about the impending doom of humanity and the fear of mortality as a whole, it's really jarring when the cast doesn't always seem to take things as seriously as the story demands. I kind of assumed with Persona having an anime counterpart to all of its mainline games that this would just be a feature of the characters. They want something that they can transfer to the anime and it feels natural. But Persona 4 doesn't struggle with this issue at all. While it does in general have this much lighter, lower stakes storyline, it never shies away from these deep, personal, and sometimes dark themes. The characters feel like real people, and their growth is gradual and natural. When you watch them grow and come together and start hanging out at Junes, the way they act actually makes sense, and you actually believe that they are a close-knit group of friends in this small town. And then you start social links with them, and you realise they are so much more than the throwaway shonen-style cliches that Persona 3 set up with its main cast. Yosuke's standard comic relief psychic archetype is expanded upon, and you see a much more vulnerable side of him. Kanji's internal struggles with masculinity is a wonderful storyline that I can't believe was created as far back as 2008. Naoto's storyline being about someone who is extremely confident in their abilities and skills, but not within themselves. The duality of all the characters' personal stories and their place in this world, conquering their own insecurities and accepting that they have flaws, is not only integral to the storyline and gameplay, but also a beautiful thing to experience as a player. The overall tone is balanced in a way that makes both the fun and the serious moments feel earned and actually in place and realistic. The turn-based staple Persona combat is still an exceptional system that only gets expanded upon in this game, where your social links for your party members end up providing really cool bonuses during the combat sections of the game. Battles are fast, satisfying, and strategic enough thanks to the importance of exploiting weaknesses and using buffs and debuffs effectively. Having to play this warped version of Pokemon, capturing personas and fusing them to build the ultimate lineup and perfect mesh of abilities is as addicting as ever as well. But if there's one thing that Persona 4 doesn't get quite right, it's the dungeon design. The game thankfully ditched Persona 3's endless Tartarus floors in favour of themed dungeons, each tied to a specific character. While this helps with the storytelling aspect, the dungeons themselves aren't particularly fun to navigate. They're linear yet somehow annoyingly intricate, with each floor feeling like a maze of hallways that all kind of look the same. Getting lost is sometimes more tedious than challenging, and after a while exploring these spaces starts to feel more like a chore than an adventure. Fortunately though, the strength of the combat and the narrative kept things engaging enough so that the dungeon crawling never completely drags the experience down. And while I could recognise that the dungeons themselves had issues, the strategies for some of the endgame fights were so engaging that I could kind of overlook it.
Fall with the petals.
I think the thing about Persona 4 to me is that it's more than just an interesting game with a fun story. It's the fact that it invokes those feelings I spoke about at the beginning. It's the warmth of spending time with people who truly understand you. It's the nostalgia of summer days that feel endless, of these late night conversations with friends who make you feel seen. Inaba isn't just a setting, it's a place that feels familiar even if you've never been there. The characters aren't just these pixels on a screen, they end up feeling like people you've known your whole life, and the story isn't just about solving a mystery, it's about finding yourself and embracing who you are, flaws and all, which is a wonderful message to put out into the world. Even after all of the games I've played, Persona 4 remains one of the most special. Every time I think about it, I don't just remember the plot or the mechanics, but I remember how it made me feel. That's the kind of magic only a few games can capture. Some games impress you, some games entertain you, but Persona 4 is one of those rare games that does both and it stays with you long after the credits roll. And that's why, no matter how much time passes, it will always be a masterpiece to me.